No, leave it. Okay, welcome back after the lunch break. I hope you can still hear me. I'm not completely deaf from the gong. But it was maybe much more efficient than running around and trying to chase people back into the room. So welcome to this afternoon session. We have a number of interesting presentations. One from industry, Lufthansa Technik in particular, on OSD in the context of STC. Then we have a presentation on aircraft model list via STC. And the last one is the feedback from the side meeting of small DOAs and STC holders. And with that, I would like to invite Andreas Gherman from Lufthansa to come up and guide us through the presentation.
Okay. Thank you, Markus. Welcome back from the lunch break. I have the honor and the pleasure to have the first presentation after lunch. As you know, not always so good because people tend to get tired. So I try to keep you awake with the subject OSD, Operational Suitability Data. I can tell you we were suddenly awake when OSD came to us, so I hope I can do the same with you. As Markus said, I'm coming from Lufthansa Technik. I'm the head of design there. And I was also asked to speed up, as everybody. I will try to do my best to keep it short. To give you a brief overview, I don't even have an agenda, so we can speed that up as well. I'd like to give you a quick overview. What are we about? What is the size of our enterprise? Just to give you the chance to put it into context. What did we do in terms of OSD, and when did we do it? What challenges did we see, and what were our initial experience? That is briefly what I'm going to try to do. So let's get started. Just a quick overview, and it's not meant to be an advertisement for us. It's just an overview to give you an appreciation of the kind of work we're doing and what kind of Part 21 business we are in. We have about 600 plus authorized personnel, equaling 300 plus FTEs working in Part 21. We did about more than 250 STCs right now, about 10 or 11 major repairs, and we keep doing 4,000 to 5,000 minor changes per year. So that's about the size of LHT. That's what we are doing, and in that context, you have to also rate the experience and the things I'm going to share with you. Quick overview. What did we do? When was it? What was the time scale of our activities? We started as you know, end of 2015, the OSD requirements became mandatory for TC holders. In March 2016, the OSD AMC was issued. And by April 2016, we had initiated a small project team of 4 people working on this subject, not full-time, of course, but on the side of their other duties. And between September and December 16, we were able to finalize the concept. It was affecting 2 of our IT tools. That's where the complexity of our operation comes in. So that needs to be taken care of, as you can imagine. And we had, of course, to do the detailed training for the Office of Airworthiness personnel and all the CVEs, of course, as well. We received good support by EASA of the experts, of course, also based on their availability, because also there it was not a full-time exercise. And even when answers were not immediately available, we could manage to advance and to proceed with implementation of the new concept. So what challenges did we see until now? One thing we observed, and it's of course our observation of the subject, the regulations in OSD context are obviously, that's our way to read it and to understand it, are written with a strong focus on TC holders and not such a strong focus on STC holders. The second point is missing experience with the new animal. That was, I think, the case for EASA as for us. That is very obvious. So it became a common learning experience. And even today, some answers are not there, and some answers are not, as we see it for our business, not ready for practical use. Another challenge, we had to internally train the design engineering without having a background. That's why it was a new animal, it was new to us. So we had to do a training based on very little practical experience for the people. The next issue is the basic OEM documentation. The details are varying from TC holder to TC holder. As you can imagine, we have two main TC holders among our products and our services. There are large variations in the way OSD is done in their documentation and in their business. Various kinds of manuals and documents are affected, and we see very little differentiation between recommended and mandatory OSD in what we have to do. Another specialty in our case, we are a DOA which has strong ties to an airline, obviously, as the name Lufthansa might suggest. We have a difficulty conveying this to people because people say, working in a Part 21 environment, they say, we did this already. We have this tie and the understanding of the operation. So what do you want from me now? What is new with OSD? Why do you impose this on us? So we have a little bit of perceived necessity on the part of the people. So a few bullets on the slide as well. Our dreams, our wishes, what do we have to work on? We need more practical experience. We would appreciate more OSD handbook standards. And while I said that people are sometimes questioning what is really new and why do you impose that on us, of course we accept and we appreciate that that the OSD information has to be done now and has to be implemented, because that's the rule. We have two STC projects until now ongoing. They are VIP completions, which came after the due date, so which have OSD applicable to them. And I just want to give a brief overview over the next two slides in the different categories of the OSD. And there is some difference between the OSD categories, how we perceive it in real life, and that's probably also something which needs to be further worked upon. So let's start in the left corner, master minimum equipment list. We find the guidance is clear in the CS-MMEL. The process actually was improved with the implementation of OSD, although, and additionally, we don't have any experience yet for validation projects. We do have a validation project oncoming with Brazil, but it's very new and we don't have any experience with that one. Cabin crew data, a little bit different situation there. The CSs are very generic as we see them. Especially, we struggle a little bit with the famous aircraft difference table. Currently, the EASA understanding seems to be that all lines of this huge ADT, aircraft difference table, have to be worked upon, and the lines need to be filled, even if, obviously, for very obvious practical reasons, they're not affected. So that's a little bit of workload and efficiency thing which we have to work upon with friends from EASA in practical projects. Flight crew data, on the opposite, we have received pragmatic guidance. We only have to consider this part of the OSD if simulator or training for flight crew is necessary. Here, short explanations were deemed sufficient. And of course, in this area, you need input and knowledge from pilots. Again, maybe a little advantage for us because we have the tie to the flying part of the company. Last but not least, some other aspects and fields. The left upper one is of concern to us. As you can see, there are in total, if you look at an STC project, for example, we have 7 different classification criteria. If you look on it on a total basis, you have the type design issues. Then you have 3 plus 2 OSD elements, and you have to look at the manual. And what we see until now is that OSD sometimes forces us to deviate from the sequential working on first classification and then showing of compliance. Sometimes you have to go deeper, as you would like to, into the showing of compliance when working on the classification for OSD, and that is a contradiction of how we normally used to work in Part 21, and it needs to be resolved somehow. Classification criteria, same general subject generally. For changes to type design, it's in Part 21. In a case of OSD, it is included in applicable CSs, and again, it's not in line. It's not in line with the way we worked, or we keep working until now in the so-called classical Part 21 areas. Applications and forms, I touched already earlier. Templates, sometimes not so practical for STC use, maybe would be better suitable for TC holders, not so much for our business. And, of course, the famous subject, one project requires 2 applications, one for the STC, one for the OSD, if applicable. And if you do the math, you have 2 templates, and you have those 7 classifications from the top left corner. Everyone can do the math themselves, how that adds to complexity. On our first 2 STC projects, like I said, they are VIP completions. We have perceived very different depths of information requested from one element to the other. That's a conclusion of what I showed you before. Sometimes the EASA specialists, in case by case, we're not sure whether OSD elements are affected or not. That has to be discussed and further worked upon. I think that goes back to the situation that it's new to all of us. And then, last but not least, unclear application process for OSD. Is it then for all STCs, or is it only for STCs, only for OSD changes major? That's a famous discussion we used to have from the start of the whole subject, and it is still there and needs to be sorted out. And I think that concludes my very short overview. Thank you very much for your attention. Of course, ready for questions, and I might add that we've prepared this together with my quality manager, Dagmar Elten, and if you put me on the spot too harshly, then I will revert to her wisdom to help me answer your questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Andreas. Some interesting points. I want to check with my OSD colleagues back in the room. Any immediate reactions? I know that you discussed things already a little bit. For example, the discussion with the FA and the validation.
Yeah, good afternoon. Andrea Boiardi, I'm the Chief Expert OSD here at EASA. Well, thank you very much, first of all, for the presentation. It has a lot of interesting points of discussion, most of which we are already aware and working on them, as you probably know. But yes, we will take it on board and continue our internal discussion to improve the process where possible. In terms of validation, very quickly, I can say that we have discussions ongoing at quadrilateral level with our partners, and the objective is to include, to the maximum extent possible, validation procedures for the OSD/operational elements, as we call them, in the various tips to the bilaterals. We have something already in place. We have validation procedures for MEL with the FAA and with Transport Canada, and working with ANAC Brazil. And at the moment, we have some generic references for the other OSD constituents that needs to be expanded in the next revisions of the tips, but that in some cases already allow some flexibility in the validation process.
Thank you.
We got one question from via Slido. Is the aircraft PCM the reference for OSD change approval? I don't know, Alain or...
Oh, now it does. The answer is yes.
Any other experiences from organizations dealing either with STC or also TC holders with OSD? And there's one already. Okay.
Okay. David Santamaria here. Thank you for a very good presentation. It's exactly in line with the experiences we've been having. My issue is that for minor changes, we have experience that there is, in some cases, an impact on MMEL. I'm concerned that EASA is now offering some DOAs to get approval without OSD. Now, this to me is not very good commercially, because there are some cases, and we've found, I can give examples where minor changes has the same impact as you had for STCs. So that's one of my questions, is that I believe that every DOA should have OSD approval, because there could become cases where halfway through you find that OSD is impacted, and then you have to go back to your customer and say, oh, I can't do it because I don't have OSD. So my opinion that now we have 350 DOAs around the world, and if my calculation is right, only about 70% of the DOAs have got OSD approval. And I feel, this is my opinion, that everybody should get OSD approval. That's one. The second issue is that the experience has been that when you went to Airbus to get OSD, their statement, and they came back with an email to say that OSDs are given to the operator, the airline, okay? And really, the DOAs have no right to have a look at it. It is proprietary data, and therefore, the experience we got now is Airbus' opinion is that you should make an OSD supplement not having sight of the original one. It should be original. You say it's impacted, you feel it's impacted, and you make an MML supplement independently of you being able to see the OSD. Now, this is a problem. This is not what we thought would happen in the beginning. So I have two questions. For minor changes, I believe everybody should get OSD. That's my opinion. The second thing is there is going to be a problem trying to make an OSD supplement without having sight of the original OSD MMEL or CCD.
Okay, thanks for these two questions. And the first one, Rob is already willing to respond to that.
To answer. Thank you, Dennis, for your interesting questions as usual. Sorry, can you? Okay, yeah, that's better. Thank you, Dennis, for your interesting questions as usual. On the DOAs designing minor changes, as we know, in the guidance material it says that minor changes to type design could have an impact on MMEL, so that's different than what we're saying on all the other constituents of OSD. We do allow DOAs to exclude OSD for their scope of work, but with a minimum that they can perform an assessment, and that when they establish there's no impact on OSD, they can approve the change. So would there have been an impact on MMEL? They would have to stop the project, and that's a limitation then in their terms of approval of the DOA. So that's how we're handling it, and that's how we are keeping it under control. Obviously, when there is an impact on OSD, which you might have to change the type design could trigger, it needs to be addressed properly. And for the second question, I think Andrea.
Here I am, I'm back. For the second question, it's a long-standing question, and it has to do with the interpretation of 21A62 availability of the operational suitability data. Now, the principle under which that provision has been written is that the OSD should be made available on request to any person required to be compliant with the OSD. Obviously, this can be read in many things. It can be read that only end users, so to say, are entitled to have access to the OSD, or as mentioned, that STC holders could potentially be entitled as well. We are aware of some positions in the industry. We are aware that this is an issue that can be partly mitigated by the fact that in many cases STC holders that are working with an operator can have access to the MMEL, for example, in the example that was mentioned, through the operator. And if I recall correctly, last year in the same forum, answering to a specific question that I asked, Airbus said that they had no objection that the OSD is transferred from an entity being entitled to it, like an operator, to an STC holder working with that operator. For very specific cases, we will have to deal with that on a case-by-case basis, but we're available to get in touch, while in the meantime we we strive to clarify the interpretation of that specific paragraph in Part 21.
Okay, thanks Andrea and Rob for these clarifications, but I think answered completely the questions raised. Any other topics from the floor? Because we didn't receive anything else on Slido. Jill, ask the question. Can we have a microphone here?
Yes, thank you, Andreas, for your presentation. I noticed that you have made no reference to the OSD element related to the certifying staff, the MCS. So, because, well, we know that the CS is not yet available, but you, well, what is your choice?
What do you mean? What is the choice?
To not address. Why have you made the choice
that is
addressing
that is the main
MCS?
reason is at the moment it's not there and it's not relevant for the short experience we had until now.
Okay.
It's the only reason. Dagmar has a remark. I told you she would come in and help me.
Anyhow. Hello? Well, we have the approval for these 3 elements of OSD. For the other 2 elements, we make a statement. So we have also no approval to develop OSD for simulators, because this is not in our scope usually.
It's a formal part of the
This
same
is the
answer.
formal
We don't
part,
have
and
it
the
now.
other part, the certifying stuff is not available right now.
There's one more question. Again, in the front row here. Katrine Held.
My question is actually to EASA and to type certificate holders as a non-EU DOA again. In the regulation, it is required to provide the OSD data to the end user, to the European operators. For non-EU operators, is there any obligation to provide the OSD data for type certificate holders? And if it is not required, if as a non-EU DOA or any, it can be European DOA as well, if the initial OSD data is not provided for the non-EU operator, how can we provide OSD data when we do STC on that aircraft?
Andrea wants to respond to that question.
Yes. Now, the reason why Part 21 has been worded in that way is that, as we know, the operational suitability data constitutes a bridge between airworthiness and operations. And they have only a meaning in the context in which its use or their use is required by operators. Now, in our regulatory framework, this obligation is only on EU operators or on operators working operating in compliance with the aircrew and ops regulations, so ATOs on one side and operators on the other. And this is the reason why it has been worded like that. So we have, I don't know how to say it, but obviously we cannot cover for operators that are not operating in compliance with our own regulatory framework. This does not mean, obviously, that an aircraft manufacturer cannot make the data available to any other operator outside of Europe they deem appropriate to, but it wouldn't have made sense to put that obligation, again, because there is no obligation in our regulatory framework for a non-EU operator, simply because that regulation is not applicable to it. Does it make sense?
How can you expect us to provide the OSD supplements for our EASA STC? Well, last year I raised a similar question for Boeing because I am from Etihad Airways. It is non-EU operator, and we have EASA DOA, non-EU DOA. And yes, and we have STC privilege. Okay, And we couldn't get the data, initial OSD data from Boeing. And there was another attendant from Boeing, and an attendee from Boeing, and she helped me later, but it took again additional 6 months to get the data. After the regulation was in place, it took 1 year to get Boeing initial OSD data. And I don't know if our entry into service, our airline side is receiving the updates from Boeing, because I tried every way to get the data available. And this is my question. I mean, is it mandated for operation or for the design?
Yes. Now, of course, I will not comment on the relationship between you and Boeing, and where we can support, obviously, but it's a discussion mainly between you and Boeing. Let's put it this way. As you know, in Part 21, there is a derogation possibility. So an STC, an STC even, can be issued even though demonstration of compliance to the OSD has not been performed, as long as that STC or that aircraft is not operated in Europe. So again, there are ways out that have been developed in our Part 21 covering for this situation. The fact that in specific cases an OSD cannot be approved for whatever reason, or let's say demonstration of compliance cannot be performed for whatever reason, this does not prevent the fact that a TC or an STC can be issued. There is a derogation possibility. It has to be asked to the agency. The certificate or the change approval or the STC will be issued. However, the OSD approval must be obtained before that aircraft or that STC is operated within an EU operator. So it doesn't, the way I see it, it doesn't affect you if you develop an STC to be operated by your own operator.
Then in this case, the European operator who will get this aircraft later needs to inform us, because we don't have the traceability of the aircraft movement between fleets, right? And they should approach us to get the OSD data before they start the operation of the aircraft. Otherwise, how can we know?
Oh, indeed, yes. This is true. And then, again, I think we should deal with it on a case-by-case basis, because it's a very peculiar case, and we can support in that. I'm just explaining the regulatory framework and the ways out. Obviously, the moment that aircraft needs to be operated in Europe, we need to find a solution for that.
Andrea, I would propose that we solve this bilaterally, because it's a very dedicated case.
Yes, indeed.
And you know each other, so in the break, I think you should have time then to discuss this further.
Thanks, makes sense.
One last question here from the floor over there.
Looking at some TCDS, you find that the OSD element sometimes is reserved. How you interpret this situation? Is it's available or not? And when an STC holder would like to approve a change that could affect OSD element stated as reserved, how do you manage this situation?
Sorry, I missed part of the question. Stated as reserved in the TCDS?
Yes.
It shouldn't. If it is, well,
it is.
Okay, maybe let's get in touch. Give us the specific case, and we'll see what the issue is.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much for this interesting presentation and the discussion. We got a slight change in the order, but don't go away, Andreas. Just 1 second. We are swapping the next two presentations, so we first have the input from the side meeting from STC holders, and Johannes Clementi will do that, and then afterwards the AML STC. But thanks a lot, Andreas, for this.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Yeah, I'm very happy to present the result out of the side meeting held with a small STC holder, and a picture in my head comes more and more precise that I'm interpreted the Lufthansa as a big rotating light on the airport, and we are the small DOAs are more or less all the lights besides the runway, inside the runway, or even the track during landing. So we are working together on one airfield with the same problems, which is very clear if we have this discussion with the OSDs, which comes up in my presentation as well. Yes, the group was composed by different companies, as I may say, a different kind of lights. One is flashing, the other one is an LED, and the next one is a position. So there are a lot of different ones. Here a short introduction into the entire scope we have looked at in. Oops. Yeah, we found in the team that cooperation with EASA was very good in the last year, especially also in the OSD and all these facts which are growing together. So the performance was very good in the cooperation, and yeah, we are looking forward to have the changes proposed by EASA in the future more clearly, the cooperation between the product certification and the DOA, so that we can find a way out there. There are pros and cons in this idea, which means one side is at the moment we have a really clearly dedicated two areas. One is a DO, the other one is a product certification. But on the other hand, if we have mixed everything together, we may have some not the differences in the legislation as we have in the law, that the DO processes can be discussed with the DO leader and the product certification can be discussed with the product manager. Sometimes the split is very good, so you have always two partners there. That is one point which comes up. Yeah, it was yesterday, I remember, it was one important point mentioned by another group, saying that the feedback from EASA with regard to the level of the DO performance should be done very quickly, so that we are able to react on an individual case. If we do have any problems with a PCM or with a specific area, then we can answer directly rather than to wait for 1 year, getting then the feedback, everybody is out of the project, not longer interested in. So it is very, very necessary to have transparency in the communication with EASA, quite close to the project and to the judgment. Yeah, due to the fact, and I was really impressed about the number of STCs and minor changes shown by Lufthansa Technik, we are working with 1 STC per year, maybe 8 STC per year, maybe 20 STC per year. So we have a really small number of STC as a small organization. So to get a good judgment, even with a small number of STCs, we would recommend and ask EASA to have more view on the minor changes during the audit. So we would really recommend to have during the audits the possibility to discuss minor changes, to have a higher standard in the performance. That is directly linked to the next spot for organization with a low volume of STCs. it's quite unfair to treat the company with a one-off STC once a year, and you have a problem in one or the other substantiation document, you get a bad rating, and you will never recover that. So we would recommend, and that leads to the same point, if it's possible, then please consider the minor changes as well in the entire judgment of the performance. Yeah, and one of the last points on that page is, a little bit critical, but will EASA accept also a feedback from the STC holder? So we would like to have not a similar kind of rating, because as you mentioned yesterday, it's clear we should not look to the individual person at EASA, but if we have the chance a little bit more than the stakeholder review once a year, that we can make some judgment to EASA with individual projects. Again, not with persons, with projects. Yeah, I'm coming back to the lights. This case is one case of one company within the community. It was a lack on information transfer between EASA and the company. So it's quite difficult with these huge numbers of different jobs and different requirements of each individual STC holder to get the information flown. In this case, the company is waiting for a year, nearly a year, to get an answer that this bilateral agreement was set it out unless the working agreement was stopped, unless a bilateral agreement put in place. So they are waiting for any process and did not get answer from neither China nor EASA. So that is a very particular point, but also the aircraft is on hold and is waiting for release to service, but they didn't come through. Support is also needed for the smaller DOAs, which are not so commonly working with different authorities across the world, in supporting or get support from EASA while asking for a approval or a validation of a minor change approval. The minor change approval is, as you will know, it's an EASA baby, but we are told to be the same authority signing in behalf of EASA, so we need such kind of support with different national authorities around the world that we can sell that in this context, that it's equal with an EASA approval. So might be some support helpful. Yeah, I think that is all the time happened if two organizations work together, in this case EASA and the FAA. The different judgment in this case in the STC, it was classified by FAA as a basic one, and the EASA have put it as a non-basic STC. So there are all the times a little bit difference in making the judgments. So it would be appreciated if it's getting more clear and a more dynamic way to communicate where the difference and where we're in parallel with, in this case, the FAA. So that would be a help for us to have more support on that issue. Yeah, I think yesterday we talked already about the DO subcontracting. This is also a subject and they're within the EASA organization, which is handled in different between the PCM1 and PCM2, or design organization team leader and the other design organization team leader. So equipment supplier, when is the equipment supplier design supplier? When it's only equipment supplier. There it's not clear definition within EASA as far as we recognized, and we would ask to get more clarification on that to avoid discussion with one and the other DO team leader. The next point is, you have to imagine as a big company like Lufthansa, it's quite clear who is giving the rule. There's Lufthansa saying, okay, we do it that way, and the maintenance or production organization has to follow. With our small DOAs, we do have the situation that not all maintenance organization, if you communicate with a big one, is willing to follow our design organization rules. But we have to find a way out, and we as a EASA company have to define, or at least to meet the minimum requirements given by EASA. So the question comes up in the team, who should lead the establishment of such kind of arrangements, which are DOMO, DOPO agreements. So we may get some hints on that, having in mind that in very much cases, the understanding on the maintenance organization's side is a little bit away from the best practice which is offered by EASA, and gives me as a European design organization a very good guidance. As a small design organization, you may know we are having more or less two different ways getting an STC. We can ask EASA to have the STC directly and clearly dedicated to one aircraft serial number. Then we have, in the end, a little bit reduced paperwork in the documentation, or we can say we have an entire fleet or a typical aircraft in our STC, which is then more clear and more defined in the design paper. So, per example, in the master equipment list or in any other head document. So that you have the possibility to say, okay, this is an STC. In the STC, there is a master documentation list given, and therefore you have a clear identification. There's at EASA two different ways. One company reported that they are more or less forced to have the aircraft serial number in the STC to make this definition clear. And the other PCM says, no, keep the aircraft serial number out, put that in your master document list, and then it's good for me. So there are two different ways, and there would be some kind of guidance for us and as well for the personnel inside EASA help to clarify that. That is mentioned on the two bullet points below, that this different possibilities. So we may get a hint or a best practice from your side. Yeah. So my last slide is coming back to the OSD item. We found out that we do have the situation in the master minimum equipment list. We have two extremes. We have the important one on one side, which says without that the aircraft will not fly. Engine, propeller, stabilizer, wing. And we have the other end of the story, the toilet or the illumination of the galley, which is such unimportant that it's not necessary for flight. So both are not indicated in the master minimum equipment list. And what's happened with special equipment, if I install a rack, this is not listed in the master minimum equipment list. So is it necessary for flight because it's not listed, or is it such unnecessary that it is not listed therefore? So there would be very helpful to have a guidance in the paper, and it was already mentioned by the colleague representing EASA that they are working on the introduction in that point, but I think that would be very helpful if we get information in between until in 2020 this paper is published. So, and it was a subject also shortly mentioned today, that is the work on ETSO equipment. The feedback from the small STC group would be that if we have the chance to step away from the individual APO, alternative procedures, to a full DO using our capabilities, using our framework, our quality system, it would be helpful. It will reduce my paperwork tremendously to be fixed on changes to aircraft and changes to TSO equipment, rather than to have two different documentation for AP and standard aircraft modification. Yeah, I missed the middle one, but it was mentioned very clear, the mixed experience on difficulties to obtain TCDS OSD from the type certificate holder. That applies to us as well, therefore I put it on the end. Yeah, there was a short review or a short feedback from the group, small STCs. I would like to thank you, the team, especially for Xavier supporting us and putting all the information together. Yeah, I think I can say thank you from the team to EASA to have the opportunity, and would like to thank you for your attention for the presentation.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Maybe a few direct answers to some of the points you mentioned. The feedback on the miners, for example. To my understanding, this should be part of the sampling when the DOA surveillance is done, how you managed this, and this should also be included in the performance rating. And when you say, yeah, we have just one STC per year, how is this then taken into account? That's what was shown yesterday. We have this confidence rate, and we know then if you have just one project, sorry, the data can be right, but it can be completely wrong because you didn't check everything for this particular thing. So that's taken into account, even though you can always miss something. The validation support for minor changes, I think that's something Alain might address a little later. One thing that you mentioned, and thanks for that, the DO maintenance organization best practices and how to coordinate. We didn't talk about it up front, but this is one article and one highlight, because we published this best practice years ago, but we realized it's not really commonly known. So we have a short article in the flyer plus a link to the real document with the details, and I think that should address the issues that you raised. I don't know whether it addresses the issue, does the DOA lead or the MOA lead because of the size of organization. That's to be seen, but I think we have something, and you're right, it needs to be reinforced that people know about this kind of guidance material. And then I hand over to Alain.
Well, thank you. I think your slides, we will review them once back into the office carefully, because there are not so many, but there is a lot in your slides. So thanks a lot for the open feedback. A simple comment on the minor change under DOA when you go outside to foreign countries and they are not necessarily familiar with our system. It's a daily communication issue we are having, and not only small companies. I think if I look at my colleagues from ASD and whether it is a small company or a bigger one, it's the same. Some countries still do not know what does it mean when they see a document with not the real big EASA stamp on it. So we have to keep supporting you. That's what we call CSV in some case, but also we have to communicate with the authorities. And when you need help, just let us know, because here there is no magic formula. It is a matter to get our system known from others. And it's the same. The FAA is experimenting with their ODA. Now some countries see some ODA papers coming with no FAA stamps, and they say, we had this kind of reaction to the US, by the way, sometimes. Say, what's that? Is it an FAA document? We played a bit the same game as what you described the other way around. And the reply was, of course, it is an FAA document. It is FAA approved. It's part of our system. So here I have no process to offer you, only our commitment to help whenever possible. If you have problems with an authority, let us know, and we will do our best to support. A word on China, because I would refer back to what Frank Steffens mentioned yesterday. Yes, discussions at working level with the Chinese counterparts are not always easy. Files are not progressing very quickly. And I insist again, this is the feedback from the working level, at project level. There are two streams, the BASA negotiation and then the real daily life you are encountering. Here, I can only again, back to Frank's statement yesterday evening, when you are having difficulties with a file in China, you do not know what's going on, come back to us. We cannot promise it will be successful, but at least we will try to support you as best as we can. The situation will improve, and today I have to admit it is not the best at working level, again, the best we could dream about. I think, Ralph, you wanted to add something maybe?
Yes, so thanks for the question. I think we need even more details to correctly answer them, but to have at least two items. You mentioned the point of unequal treatment between what the FAA is classifying as basic and non-basic and us. It would be very interesting to see the details if it was really an unequal treatment. So we could have as well the case that we have more stringent requirements from EASA or from FAA side. So it might be that it's non-basic for one authority and not for the other. The second one I have written down is for the MSN as limitation in the approvals. Actually, in the many cases that I have seen, I question myself, why is it limited by an MSN? So I think in many cases it's really not necessary. So think about it, why you want to limit your STC by MSN. I think in many cases it's not needed. I think a limitation should be maybe another modification installed to have the precondition, but not per MSN. Thanks.
Okay, thanks a lot, Johannes, for the presentation of the group. And the next topic is on Ralph to talk about the approved model list changes, which I think a topic which is requested quite often. Huh?
Okay, thank you. Yes, there we are. So the agenda is actually not completely correct on this aspect. That's, I think, called approved model list for STCs. Actually, it's applicable as well for major changes and for minor changes. And the idea behind is maybe first the Cert Memo, which was the first way to address it to the public, was published. The consultation is now closed by the 15th of November. Nevertheless, it's still available, so have a look. I got the question actually 2 days ago about could it be applicable as well for minor repairs or repairs in general. Even if this was not the initial intent, we will discuss this internally. I don't see a reason why it shouldn't. But the Cert Memo is on the webpage. Please have a look. So definition and purpose of it. The idea is to provide an option to increase the efficiency of all what we are doing here, intended for changes that are similar in design and use, that have the same certification baseline data, and I will further explain what this means, with a multi-model and multi-type applicability. So if you have more or less the same change, more on the more area, on different models, on different types, but the whole change, the whole compliance demonstration is the same, then it might be a candidate to put this in an AML change. So to do this in a single STC, a single major change or a single minor change approval, one application, but you cover actually more than one type. So the certification baseline data is the common set of applicable core compliance demonstration items, you remember, CDIs, that are applicable to all the models and types in the AML, but don't put the CDI now so specific here. It's really if the majority, the vast majority of compliance demonstration is the same for all the affected models and types we are thinking about, then we could use this option of put everything in an approved model list. That's the idea behind that you don't have to apply 10 times for the more or less the same thing, and we have to review 10 times the same thing. That's not very efficient, and we want to avoid this by this tool. In any case, an early coordination with EASA is strongly recommended. So I've seen several cases in the past, not necessarily from EU applicants, where this was not the case. There was really a lot of difference in the compliance demonstration. Nevertheless, they would try to put in one AML list. This is not the intent here. STCs and minor changes may cover products of several TC holders. For major changes, clearly that's not possible. This is only for the TC holder. And AML approval is issued for products type certificated against the same product category of certification specification. What does it mean? If you have an AML on CS23, you cannot include CS25 aircraft and the other way around. Same for helicopters or any other. It must stick to one applicable certification basis. The general principle is a common set of CS, special condition, ESF, etc., which is applicable for the whole change. So the cert basis shall be the same. Or actually you have two versions of it. So you have the same certification basis for all the applicable models and types, or you apply at least the same CS and the same amendment for the whole change. So that we not check, is it applicable to Amendment 5, 7, 10? It's then the most stringent one that you have to take. And it must be clearly defined for each affected model and type. So if it's kept open, it cannot be part of the AML. The applicability of the certification baseline data must be clearly established for each model. So don't leave anything open, then it cannot be part of it. And the approval may not be suitable for those cases where type or model-specific compliance demonstration is required. So if you have an installation where you really have to see the behavior of the aircraft, what is the performance, what are the handling qualities, and these are affected, and the compliance demonstration is affected, and you have to test each aircraft, then it's not a candidate for being in an AML. That's what I just said. Other examples which are most likely outside the purpose of the AML changes. So the Cert Memo is actually a bit weak on this to exclude some things, because sometimes it's really a clear exclusion for Part 25, but maybe for Part 23 it might be possible because the compliance demonstration is so identical. But acoustical changes are generally excluded. Aircraft flight manual change or supplement content that is not applicable to all the models. OSD, not applicable to all the models. And this is not an exclusion, but a reminder that installation, instruction, and instruction for continued airworthiness in adequate detail shall be applicable and available for each model in this list as well. Changes to an AML, they are per 21A117 for STCs or A91 for minor and major changes. And these major changes to an AML STC are considered major changes to type certificate, including addition of aircraft models types to the AML. So if you add something, that's a major change. Or if you modify the AML STC or the major change definition, this is a major change as well. And you have to ensure that this change really works for each affected model or for each model and type inside this list. In case of new model different from previously approved models, further substantiation is required, yes, but as a complement. So since the vast majority should be the same, you don't have to do everything again. But in most of the cases, it will be the installation, for example, which is different then for each model, and this has to be certainly addressed. All these configuration changes must be tracked in a systematic way in order to keep the AML configuration under control. So make sure that each model and type is well addressed in this AML and that nothing is kept open. And it's not meant to approve additional models without further substantiation. So this is something we have seen as well in the past, that it was just a model added. I said, yeah, it's the same. Nearly the same, hopefully, but again, the installation perspective has to be taken into account. Or, as a minimum, make sure that all of these compliance data in place is adequately addressing all the aspects. Here's a short checklist of what I have said before. First, aircraft model type on AML share the same certification baseline data, so the vast majority of compliance demonstration. The purpose of the modification is the same for all impacted aircraft and models. Areas of the modification that are different for a model are probably documented, and it should be the minority of compliance demonstration. A common set of CS, ESF, interpretative material, special conditions, all this, or a unique certification basis. So then you really update the cert basis of the aircraft in this frame of the STC or major change. It has to be the most stringent one of all the affected models and types. Complete compliance is demonstrated for the modification to all affected areas for each listed aircraft model type. So really all complete. Installation instructions are adequate to allow for consistent and compliant installation on each model in the AML, so clear boundaries are established and documented. The instruction for continued airworthiness, if needed, are applicable to each model of the list, and the OSD impact is assessed against each impacted model as well. This is the end of the presentation. Questions? Oh, well, there's not the end. There is a list at the end of the Cert Memo, approved model as template. This is not mandatory, but it provides a good impression of what is expected. So what is the TC holder, what is the type, what is the model, the affected TCDS, the actual certification basis of this change, and then terms which might be different depending on the design organization, the master data list, flight manual supplement, ICA, OSD, and any other remark which is important for each model. Thanks.
Thanks, Ralph. We got one or two questions via Slido. One is more or less a practical question. Would it be possible to extend an existing STC applicable to a single model to an AML STC?
So that means that the existing STC is identical to an approved model that is in place? Is this the right understanding?
No, I don't think so. I think it's you have an STC for one model, and you want to modify that to become an AML STC.
Yes, sure. That would be possible. But actually, in this case, you have a new major change or a new STC because the first one is already approved. But with the second one, you could extend this. Yes.
We got one question from the floor over there.
Yeah, Ralph, on LOI. Okay. Do you intend, or is it the intention that for whatever reason, just because it is an AML STC application, that the LOI would identify the project as a novel project, and therefore the classification on what kind of documents being provided?
Well, I think if you have a change into an AML with a new model, this
No. We are talking about, we've been informed or at least questioned by a PCM when talking about an AML STC, that just because it is an AML STC, that we may have to classify certain documents as novel?
Well, I don't see the direct interrelation between these two topics.
We didn't see it either.
But we can have a side talk on the specific topic,
okay.
I think.
All right.
Microphone there?
Microphone not working?
There's a switch below, otherwise maybe the battery's empty.
Hello, Ralph. This is Jörg Gherman, 328. Is it required for an AML STC when MOC 5 ground test is applicable to show compliance to redo the ground test on each of the listed aircraft and models in order to show compliance?
Well, I wouldn't say yes and no. The more you have to do individually on each aircraft, the less applicable is the AML approach. So again, the vast majority should be the same. If it's a very small ground test, easily done on each aircraft, it might be still included. But this is, I think, a case-by-case basis. That's why we have it nearly on each slide. Please communicate very early with EASA if this is a way we can go, or if it's really more or less a doubling of compliance demonstration for each model.
Because technically it is probably a burden, because if you want to have, let's say, a massive list of aircrafts listed in it, which already happened, that you can complete and show this in the moment where you want to seek for the STC approval.
Well, again, come as early as possible to us. It might be that a test on each aircraft might be acceptable, but it's not the idea. The idea is you make one ground test for this system once, and that you apply this for all the affected models.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have one more question for understanding. An extension of an STC without MSN in it for one further model or MSN is considered to be a major change.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, that was a short answer, but clear. Any other questions from the floor? Okay, then we have one more coffee break and we are more or less perfect on time. We have then the feedback from the remaining two groups, and then Patrick Key will join us to do the closing remarks for the workshop and do the wrap-up. Thank you.